Coverage resumes now here on C-SPAN 3.
Be critical with this, even if David Cameron does not manage to actually do a deal with the Liberal Democrat. In essence, though, what whoever is able to form a government has to prove is that they can command the confidence of the House of Commons, particularly for their Queen's Speech and for their budget. They have to be able to show that they would be able to get their big bits of legislation through the House of Commons. And with the complications of this election, with the real patchwork of results that we have seen, there are potentially all sorts of different ways of doing that, maybe with the Nationalists, maybe with Northern Irish MPs, maybe with a loose deal with the Liberal Democrats. But it's quite clear by the fact that Gordon Brown is trying to grab some momentum now this lunchtime that he does still believe that it is worth giving it a try. It's worth him trying to do a deal with the Liberal Democrats, even though some people in his party who I've been speaking to this morning are not convinced of that. There are some noises off, as you would expect, inside the Labour Party. Some MPs who this morning think this will be the moment for Gordon Brown to go. Not today. One of them said to me, we should leave it a day. This is not about shoving him out, but it is about him realising that he cannot form a government. So quite clearly behind the scenes, there is a lot of chatter among Labour MPs about this week being the moment for Gordon Brown's departure, even though there are very few voices calling for that publicly so far. Jane Kennedy, a former MP, has repeated something she said before this morning, saying that he should go. But we are yet to see any major voices or any new voices saying that Gordon Brown should go.
OK, and Laura, let's just be really clear here, because constitutionally it's Gordon Brown. He holds the key. He has the key, doesn't he? He has the right to make the first attempt at forming a coalition.
Yes, absolutely. The convention, and it is just a convention, but the convention is clear as day. It is up to the incumbent in number 10 to see if they can form a government. The Prime Minister in a hung parliament is the Prime Minister until he or she resigns. The question is, what is it that will either persuade him to resign or convince him that it is worth hanging on and trying to form a government? Now, I think we will hear him say or make very clear that he believes right now it's worth giving it a try, that there is enough in common between the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party to be able to do some sort of deal. And even from when the exit poll came in last night and the first seats started to come through, senior Labour figure after senior Labour figure appeared on television to emphasise the things in common that the two parties had, to almost try to appear as if actually the Labour Party had always wanted to change the voting system all along. Now, for some people, Gordon Brown included, it is rather a late conversion to the cause of proportional representation. But in their view, this is something they would be able to tempt the Liberal Democrats with. And I think oh no, it's not Gordon Brown appearing. Sorry, the door just opened. I was trying to see who was coming inside. A lot of activity there behind the big black door. But certainly this conversion to being fans of proportional representation for many members of the Labour Party is quite clearly, for many of them, an attempt to woo the Lib Dems that they believe might give them a chance at clinging on to power.
And presumably at this point also, any conversations that are going on are so important that everybody's going to keep quiet about them, aren't they?
Yes, I think there are a lot of conversations, I'm sure, going on in private. Nobody has admitted as such. The Scottish Nationalists, interestingly, did suggest that they were having conversations with people in the Labour Party, but I have to say that was flatly denied to me by a source very close to the Scottish Secretary, Jim Murphy. Categorically, they said that was not the case, although some SNP sources have suggested that there have been contacts at cabinet level. So a lot of this is about the nudges and winks, the hints, the game that all the political parties are playing here, because particularly for the smaller parties, and of course for the Liberal Democrats, but just giving a thought to the other smaller parties, this is a moment where they might be able to wield influence in a way they have never been able to before.
Laura, thank you very much. And we're going to stay with that shot. We are expecting Gordon Brown in the next few minutes or so. Just to say, there are 633 of the seats of the 650 have been declared. We will take this statement live. Back to David Dimbleby.
Here in the BBC election studio, our eyes are now fixed on the door of number 10 Downing Street, because in between now and 1:45, in the next 10 minutes or so, we've been assured that Gordon Brown is going to come out into Downing Street and make a statement. We don't know the content of the statement, but he's making it 3/4 of an hour before David Cameron speaks on behalf of the Conservative Party about his views about what to do about the hung Parliament. As for the hung Parliament itself, we still have 17 seats to go. We've had 633 declared. And the current state of play, Conservatives are up 94, Labour down 88, and the Liberal Democrats are down 5. And the prediction is that at the end, when those 17 have come through, Conservatives will be on 307, well short of that 326 they need for an overall majority. Labour way down on 259, and the Liberal Democrats on 56. And in terms of the vote, well, the Conservatives are on 10.5 million now. That's about 36%, just over 36% of those who went to the polls of the 45 million who were entitled to do it. Labour is on 8.5 million, roughly speaking, that's 29%, way down behind the Tories. And the Liberal Democrats on 6.5, just over 6.5, 6.6 million at 22.9 is their share. So it is the result that we've been talking about all along, where Labour don't get that many more votes than the Liberal Democrats, but get a huge number more seats, where the Conservatives are ahead in the popular vote and ahead in the number of seats in the new House of Commons, but don't have the power, the clout on their own to get an overall majority to get their legislation through. That's how things stand at the moment. Now we can go down to College Green at Westminster and join Andrew Neil there, who's got Michael Howard with him, but we will keep an eye all the time on number 10 and make sure we don't miss Gordon Brown's statement. Andrew, over to you.
David, thank you for that. We're also looking forward to David Cameron's statement at 2:30 this afternoon in response to Mr Clegg's remarks this morning. We don't expect Mr Cameron to offer any kind of deal to the Liberal Democrats, but to say that he will govern in the national interest, and in doing so, hope to deserve Lib Dem support. How would that go down with you?
Well, I think that's exactly the right thing to do. And I think Nick Clegg was statesmanlike this morning in what he said. He clearly said that David Cameron should be given the opportunity to show that he can govern in the national interest. That, of course, is exactly what David Cameron has always wanted to do, what he would do. So I think that what Nick Clegg said this morning indicates that David Cameron should be given the opportunity to form a government, to put a Queen's speech to Parliament. Presumably the Liberal Democrats would abstain on that Queen's speech, and David Cameron would then demonstrate that he can indeed and would indeed govern in the national interest. And of course, there's an element of self-interest in what Nick Clegg said, because the Liberal Democrats would never be forgiven if they entered into some stitched-up deal behind closed doors which kept Gordon Brown in Downing Street.
So warm words, but in your view, no deal.
Now, what is important is the national interest. And this is a time when people need to come together to do what is necessary, to deal with the terrible economic crisis that Labour's leaving behind, to get the economy moving again, and to get the country out of the hole that it's in. That's what David Cameron wants to do. In the national, he's not going to want to do things because they're in the Conservative Party manifesto. He wants to do things because they're in the national interest, and I'm sure he'd be prepared to work with anyone who's prepared to cooperate with him to achieve that objective.
Could a Conservative minority government survive for long?
I think it could. Well, we have the experience, don't we, in Scotland, where a minority administration has survived for quite a while, and we have it in other countries too. And the logic is, Nick Clegg had it absolutely right, give David Cameron the opportunity to show that he can govern in the national interest. That's what he will do.
But suppose Mr Cameron and Mr Clegg have a kind of tacit agreement to do this. How do you get Gordon Brown out of Downing Street?
Well, we know that Gordon Brown has an uncertain grip on reality, and we know that he tends to think that anybody who disagrees with him is somehow, well, we know the kind of words that he used in the campaign. What has now become absolutely crystal clear is that most of the country don't agree with Gordon Brown, and most of the country want Gordon Brown to get out of Downing Street.
Not enough of the country agreed with your party either.
Well, very nearly. And, you know, it would be jolly nice if Gordon Brown just for once could show a little bit of grace and stop trying to cling by what remains of his fingernails to a tenure of 10 Downing Street.
So Michael Howard wants David Cameron to go for a minority Conservative government and not do any kind of deal. Correct?
I want David Cameron to do what I know he will do, which is to put the national interest first, second, third, fourth, fifth, all the way down. He wants to govern in the national interest.
Provided we can agree what the national interest is. Let's go straight back to the studio and David.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, we're joined now, I hope, by Ian Watson from Labour Party headquarters, who was talking to us a little bit earlier. Ian, do you have any more information about what the Labour Party is planning to say and what position they're taking up?
Yes, I do. The Prime Minister, as we know, is going to be making a statement very shortly. Now, that statement is going to be what's called a Prime Ministerial statement, not a party leader's statement. So, in other words, he was talking about the kind of conventions that would take place in the event of a hung parliament, how the civil service can help the parties talk to each other to try to reach some kind of agreement. But there's a clear political message behind that statement, and it is this, that in there, in Labour Party headquarters, they've taken unofficial soundings. They are desperately worried that Nick Clegg is going to prop up, as they see it, a Conservative government. Therefore, what they want to do is get the Prime Minister out before David Cameron makes his statement to make it very clear to Liberal Democrats what would be an offer from a Labour government. In other words, re-stressing this commitment to electoral reform and to other changes to political reforms, and trying to set out their stall, because what they think they can do is, in effect, put pressure on Nick Clegg, in effect, to hold off, don't do any kind of deal, informal or otherwise, with David Cameron. Otherwise, people in his own party might get desperately upset with him. So Gordon Brown will look as though he's addressing the nation, if you like, as Prime Minister in these difficult times with a hung Parliament. He'll be telling them, don't worry about a hung Parliament. It doesn't necessarily mean that the economy will be wrecked. But his real message is actually to say to Liberal Democrats, if you don't want to deal with the Conservatives, put pressure on Nick Clegg not to do that deal. And that's why they're rushing him out of Downing Street this afternoon.
Do the Labour Party people detect any animus towards Gordon Brown on the part of the Liberal Democrats? I think the Prime Minister's just coming out, or is it somebody?
I want to make a statement.
Let's hear the Prime Minister.
With the outcome of the general election, we find ourselves in a position unknown to this generation of political leaders, with no single party able to have a Commons majority and therefore have a majority government. I've therefore felt that I should give you, through you, the country, my assessment of where we are. I do so as Prime Minister with a constitutional duty to seek to resolve the situation for the good of the country, not as the leader of the Labour Party less than a day after the election. What we have seen are no ordinary election results. People have been talking for some time, inside and outside government, about the possibility of a hung Parliament. That possibility has now become very real and pressing. The question for all the political parties now is whether a parliamentary majority can be established that seeks to reflect what you, the British people, have just told us. First, it is well understood that we face immediate economic challenges that must be met. A meeting of the Eurogroup is being held tonight to discuss Greece and other issues. In advance of this, the G7 finance ministers, including America and Britain, are meeting by conference call to discuss the deteriorating situation in the euro area. Alistair Darling is participating for the UK. Our economic priorities for Britain are to support economic recovery this year, 2010, and as the recovery stabilises, to move swiftly to implement our deficit reduction plan. On the critical question on the formation of a government which can command a parliamentary majority, I have, of course, seen the statements of other party leaders. I understand and completely respect the position of Mr. Clegg in stating that he wishes first to make contact with the leader of the Conservative Party. As you know, we already have in place mechanisms and facilities that will give the political parties any civil service support that they may need. Mr. Cameron and Mr. Clegg should clearly be entitled to take as much time as they feel necessary. For my part, I should make clear that I would be willing to see any of the party leaders. Clearly, should the discussions between Mr. Cameron and Mr. Clegg come to nothing, then I would, of course, be prepared to discuss with Mr. Clegg the areas where there may be some measure of agreement between our two parties. There are two areas in particular where such discussion would be likely to focus. The first is the plan to ensure continuing economic stability, where there is substantial common ground, and the plan to carry through far-reaching political reforms, including changes to the voting system. Both of us have made clear our commitment to this in our manifestos, and the electorate has sent us a very strong message which must be heard. My view is clear. There needs to be immediate legislation on this to begin to restore the public trust in politics and to improve Parliament's standing and reputation. A fairer voting system is central, and I believe that you, the British people, should be able to decide in a referendum what the system should be. What all of us need to be mindful of is the imperative for a strong and stable government, and for that to be formed, with the authority to tackle the challenges ahead, and one which can command support in Parliament. It is with this in mind that all of us should be facing the times ahead. I understand, as I know my fellow party leaders do, that people do not like the uncertainty or want it to be prolonged. We live, however, in a parliamentary democracy. The outcome has been delivered by the electorate. It is our responsibility now to make it work for the national good. I am sure that you will understand that this is all that I have to say at this stage today. Thank you all very much.
So, a 5-minute statement from the Prime Minister, no questions, and he goes through how he sees things, talking about how government should be carried on, and giving time for Clegg and Cameron, he says, to speak. Talks come to nothing, prepared to discuss the agreement, but wants to give them time to do that, and then stressing economic stability and political reform and offering immediate legislation for a fairer voting system. Well, Nick Robinson we'll talk to in just a moment. He was listening to that. Nick, we can see you down there at number 10. What is your instant reaction? I'm sorry to ask you for it instantly, but anyway, to what the Prime Minister said.
Well, I think Gordon Brown is trying to keep all his options open. I was struck by the fact that he wanted to present himself in a prime ministerial light rather than a political light, taking the decisions, as he put it, that were in the national interest, trying to offer reassurance that at a time of economic instability there was still a government in place, that the Chancellor, Alistair Darling, was still participating in those discussions, and that he was willing to say that Nick Clegg should be free to take as long as possible in conversations with David Cameron about the formation of any future government before, if that failed, coming to him. The calculation being made behind that famous black door is this. They are trying to work out whether when Mr Clegg said that he wanted to talk first to the Tories, it is because he's already decided that he doesn't want an arrangement with Labour, that he fears association with a government that has taken such a kicking in the polls, or whether he is just following, as it were, the constitutional niceties, and that Mr Clegg is in fact open-minded about the possibility of forming a coalition. The message clearly Gordon Brown wanted to get out is we're here, we're open to business with the Liberal Democrats, and one key part of that business will be instant legislation for a change in the voting system.
I mean, that was the real, that was the nub of it from the Liberal Democrats' point of view, presumably, immediate legislation to have a fairer voting system, something which Gordon Brown has consistently opposed.
That's right. There's been an effort this morning on our programme by Peter Mandelson and others to say that really Gordon Brown wasn't a great resistor of electoral reform when it was in Labour's manifesto way back in 1997. I can only report that the people who were involved from the Liberal Democrats at the time, Paddy Ashdown, who was in very, very close talks with Tony Blair about the possibility of coming into government and having a deal on electoral reform, regarded Gordon Brown as a complete block to it, as an opponent to it, as someone who was hostile and, in their words, tribal as well. Now, there are, however, friends of Gordon Brown who say even if all of that was not a little harsh in its description. He's changed his mind, partly, of course, under the political pressure of survival and wanting to secure his survival, partly because of the impact of the expenses crisis and the reduced legitimacy, if you like, of Westminster as it currently operates.
But no qualms about his own position as Prime Minister. I mean, not in any way hinting that it might be, you know, if it mattered and they needed a change in the leadership. I mean, not to put it as crudely as that, but not even a whiff of it's not a matter of the leader, it's a matter of the party and its policies or anything like that.
No, I think he didn't give that offer, not just because, David, that would be to weaken Labour's potential negotiating hand in the future, but I suspect there is a good deal of advice, a good deal of, perhaps pressure is too strong a word, but from the civil service, particularly from Sir Gus O'Donnell, the Cabinet Secretary, saying how you act, what you say, how Britain deals with this unprecedented political crisis at a time of economic crisis has real implications for the markets, for the state of Britain's standing in the world. And therefore, I think it is fair to say that Gordon Brown will have that on his mind, not merely the personal and political calculations that you'd expect any party leader at a time like this.
This extraordinary political theatre that's been played out before our eyes this afternoon, and we've just had the Prime Minister's statement there, how will it work? What effect will it have on what David Cameron says?
I think very little on what David Cameron says. I think we can pretty much guess. I don't know, David. No Tory is briefing on what David Cameron will say. But I think he will follow the approach that Alex Salmond, the First Minister of Scotland, took when he won the election in the sense of getting more votes than anybody else in the Scottish Parliament elections, but didn't have a majority. He effectively started to behave as if he was already in charge. I think David Cameron will do that. He will say to the country, look, I didn't win outright, but you know I've won and Labour have lost. He will again try and look statesmanlike and say that he's trying to build a stable government. He'll say that he wants to talk to anybody else involved, but he will wish to create the unstoppable impression in the public mind that it is just a matter of time and that it is a matter of natural justice that he takes over and moves in here to 10 Downing Street. And he knows one thing, David, he of course has a huge part of the national media, not broadcast of course, but the press on his side, who will argue, I've no doubt through their pages tomorrow, let Cameron rule.
Will he refer, do you think, or should he refer in any way to what Clegg said about Cameron's reaching out to other parties to seek to govern? Or will he ignore what Clegg said, effectively?
No, I'd be surprised if he ignored it. I mean, he may not quote him and he may not name him in quite that way, but he will want to create the impression that he understands that he doesn't yet have the results that allow him to govern on his own, that he is open to consultation, to working with others and so on. He wants to create the impression, in other words, that he is a guy that everyone can do business with, who will behave responsibly in this situation. But he will also want, alongside, as it were, the warm words, he will also want, with not quite a hint of menace, but he will want to say that it would be illegitimate to deny the Conservative Party the chance to govern now when they have been so much more successful in the polls than the existing Labour government.
The impression one has is that this is going to be quite a long game. I mean, after we've had the Prime Ministerial statement and we've had David Cameron one, we heard Nick Clegg before, it sounds as though, as far as the public discussion goes or the public posturing or grandstanding goes, that will be it for today, and then a period of silence will ensue. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, that's my instinct, yes, David, that's what will happen, and that Nick Clegg in particular, who's got the biggest decision to take, will want to talk to his parliamentary party. They've got a meeting on Saturday morning, and also to the ruling federal executive of his party, effectively to get a negotiating mandate, but also to sound them out. The very, very difficult choice that the Liberal Democrats may now face is quite simple. Yeah. Do they, on the one hand, go in with Labour and get the chance of the thing they've always wanted and always dreamt, instant electoral reform, but with the price attached that they appear to be propping up a government that the electorate has rejected and may, like after the Lib Lab Pact of the late 70s, suffer dreadfully electorally for that association? Or do they allow David Cameron to govern with little in return in the hope that they benefit from opposing that government at times, securing concessions at other times, and fight another election in which their honour is maintained and they hope to do rather better than they did today?
Nick, thank you very much indeed from Downing Street. Are you going to follow the David Cameron? You're on your way down, are you? Right, OK.
That's right.
On your way down to David Cameron's speech. We're going to the bubble on, I don't like it being called the bubble, the studio on College Green, but just before we do, have you got a comment on
I'm just struck by the silence. You reflect on the sort of
Struck
course.
by the silence?
The silence. The morning we had
Yes.
ministers coming in here. In the past 4 weeks we've had ministers kind of, and their shadow spokesman, pouring all over us, wanting to be on television. Since Nick Clegg made that statement at 11:30, we haven't seen a soul, and I suspect that's the way it's going to stay. I bet you there are absolute strict orders going out that no one says a word. But, you know, the Liberal Democrats have already got their team. Interestingly, one of the people
Sure,
involved
it's not something you said, John.
I'm sure, maybe I've caused offence, it's perfectly possible. But Nick Clegg will have Jim Wallace, who negotiated the Scottish deal, absolutely central to any talks that will take place.
The Liberal Democrat position's asymmetrical. If they do nothing, Cameron forms a government. They actually have to vote against a Cameron Queen speech to stop him forming a government, but they have to positively support Gordon Brown if Gordon Brown's have any chance of continuing in office. But Gordon Brown has dangled before them the big prize, a referendum, not legislation, a referendum on electoral reform. Now, the Liberals got nearly a quarter of the vote, but fewer than 1/10 of the seats. They've been arguing for PR for nearly 90 years. It's almost within their grasp. What are they going to do? Their position isn't actually as strong as they may think, because if Cameron did form a minority government, he might go to the country again in a short time saying, give me the chance to show what I could do. And the likelihood is, the possibility, not the probability, but perhaps the possibility, the country would then give him a majority and the Liberals would lose votes and seats.
And there, as we know, all kinds of ways of procrastinating over changes to the voting system which involve constitutional change and all the rest. We have a result in from Buckingham. The Speaker, John Bercow, who was challenged by Nigel Farage there, has won his seat in Buckingham, and Nigel Farage for UKIP came in third place. John Stevens, former Conservative MEP, the Buckinghamshire Campaign for Democracy, took second position, 10,331. I'm not sure that change means all that much because the Tories and Labour weren't there officially, but anyway, there are the changes. And Bercow's down 11%. Speaker he's down as, but actually a Conservative. If he were kicked out of the Speaker's chair, he would revert to being quite simply a Conservative MP, but it sounds that's not going to happen. Right, let's rejoin you, Andrew.
Thanks, David. We've got one of these instant polls, this one from ComRes. The leader of the party with the most votes in the election should get to be Prime Minister. 81% agree with that, be Mr. Cameron. The leader of the party with the most seats should get to be Prime Minister. 51% agree with that. That would be Mr. Cameron. In the event of a hung parliament, I would prefer David Cameron to be Prime Minister. 48 to 45, that's almost even Stevens within a margin of error. It kind of contradicts the other two questions. But in the event of a hung parliament, I prefer Gordon Brown. 61% disagree. So he pays your money and you takes your choice. I'm joined by Ollie Grender, who used to be head of communications for the Liberal Democrats, and the Tories' favourite blogger, Ian Dale. Ollie, when we were watching the Prime Minister there, you said to me he doesn't realise, as far as the Liberal Democrats are concerned, it's game over. What do you mean?
Well, Nick Clegg is incredibly clear in his statement. He says the person who should get the chance to govern should be the one with the highest number of seats and the highest number of votes. That's what he said throughout the campaign. And what he's done, as Lord Digby Jones said today, is he's an honourable politician. He's stuck to his word. And he's stuck to his word. He said that's the person who should get the chance to govern.
And you don't believe the carrots that Mr. Brown was dangling in front of Mr. Clegg there will be of any interest to him?
I think it's almost like Gordon Brown hasn't received the memo, which is Nick Clegg's statement outside Cowley Street. My personal reading is that there was a certain level of clarity about it, which is that Cameron needs the chance to prove that he can govern.
Even if it's a minority government, Mr. Clegg would sit back and say, I'll take it as it comes and judge it on its merits.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what the thinking is beyond the point that it is very clear that Nick said largest number of seats largest number of votes.
Even if no deal?
That's the person who gets the chance to govern.
Are we heading for a Conservative minority government?
I think we may be, but there is a prospect of a Conservative Lib Dem coalition, because what Nick Robinson didn't say there was that David Cameron could offer a referendum on PR to Nick Clegg and then campaign against it in the referendum. I think that's a possibility rather than a probability, but it could happen. There are lots of people in the Conservative Party that would accept PR for the House of Lords, for local government.
That's not what the Lib Dems want. They want it for the House of Commons. That's the game changer.
Absolutely, they have an issue with it for Westminster. But Gordon Brown isn't offering PR, he's offering a referendum on PR. Now, David Cameron could trump that.
But do you think that David Cameron could offer full proportional representation?
He could at least equal it. He could offer a free vote on it in the House of Commons. Remember, a third to a half of Labour MPs do not support PR. They support first past the post. So what Gordon Brown is trying to offer Nick Clegg, I think is rather desperate. I mean, that struck me as just a completely desperate statement from a desperate Prime Minister.
I think it is terribly desperate. And who would Gordon Brown need to do a deal with in order to govern? I mean, it would possibly be the DUP, it would be a Green, it would be the NAS.
He doesn't get a majority, or barely gets a majority. The only deal on the table is a Conservative Lib Dem coalition.
Well,
the arithmetic doesn't work.
It's up to the number, the critical number, but no more.
There's an important matter of state that I must challenge you about, and that is, you said if the exit poll, which appeared on the BBC and other channels, was wrong, you would run naked down Whitehall. I need to warn women and children, so when are you doing it?
I didn't say which Whitehall.
No, I think you did. You now sound like a
not
politician.
right now, because I've just had my breakfast, bizarrely.
I would just be grateful if you didn't do it while we were on air.
I've still got to examine the small print in that promise.
All right, we'll be watching out for that later. And it's a huge crowd down here, lots of cameras, lots of people, and our very own Matt Fry is there too. Let's go and see him.
Well, thanks, Andrew. Well, this has become a bit of a sort of medieval marketplace, if you like, of conjecture, of guesswork, of whispering. All these people here have been gathering all day, want to know what's going on behind those windows in the building behind me, who's going to be living in that building up the road, number 10, and what on earth happened to the man who went to school right there, Westminster School, Nick Clegg. And of course, there is a sense of sort of curiosity about all this. It's quite exciting, but there's also a growing sense of worry. What on earth is happening to our country? What on earth are the people behind these windows going to decide on our behalf, having just gone to the election? So let's just talk to a few people who've come to watch this extraordinary scene here. By the way, I've just also talked to someone from Turkish television and Jordanian television. The world's media really is here trying to figure out what's going on. What are you doing here?
Watching the election.
Right.
And the aftermath.
The election's over. What about the aftermath?
The aftermath, well, it's a disaster, isn't it? A political crisis on the back of an economic disaster.
This is not what you expected?
Well, I think we all predicted a hung parliament, and now we've got it, and it does nothing for the country in terms of stability and decisiveness and where we go from here.
Are you worried that decisions are being made on your behalf that you didn't want to see at the end of this process?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that's always made the country rather great is that we've always returned to majority government that's been very decisive and taken some very strong decisions. And now we're in a period of instability and even more indecision at a time when economically we're in the same. So I think it's a very unfortunate outcome at this time.
But we did always know that a hung parliament was a real possibility here.
Yes, I think that's the case, yes. And I think maybe if we had prepared a little better for it, but the parties are so far apart that really any deal brokered now would be done so, I think, really only on a temporary basis.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Well, as you can see, people are gathering here. I'm sure this crowd is going to grow as the day progresses. And of course, everyone here is looking for answers. And to be honest, answers aren't really very forthcoming. Back to you, Andrew, in the bubble.
Thank you, Matt. Well, Cheltenham, the Liberal Democrats hold Cheltenham, and I think we have a result from Cheltenham. Here we are. Let's
Andrew
just have
North,
this.
being the acting returning officer at the election of a Member of Parliament for the Cheltenham constituency, held on the 6th
This is a very, very tight-run thing. Majority of 316 between Liberal Democrat and Conservative last time round. Number 6 on the Conservative target list. Here's the result.
Peter Bowman, UK Independence Party, 1,192. Mark Stephen Coote, the Conservative Party candidate, 21,739. James Green, the Labour Party candidate, 2,703. Dancing Ken Hanks, Monster Raving Loony William Hill Party, 493. Martin Charles Horwood, Liberal Democrats, 26,600.
Well, the figure got drowned in the applause, 26,659 for the Liberal Democrats,
again,
and they held this with an increased majority.
And 59.
Majority,
The number of ballot papers rejected,
4,920, up 4,500 from last time round. So the Liberal Democrats hold on to Cheltenham. Conservatives very much hope to take that. It was number 6 in their target list, but the Liberal Democrats held it.
Unmarked or wholly void for uncertainty.
And Martin Horwood has been an MP there since 2005.
Represented 67.01%.
Spokesman for the Environment and Food and Rural Affairs. A swing 4.3% Conservative to Liberal Democrats. Now we're waiting, it being just after 2 o'clock, for David Cameron, who's going to be speaking outside Conservative Party headquarters. And Andrew Marr is there again. Andrew, what more have you learnt?
Well, I think what we're going to see is the moment when David Cameron asserts his right to be Prime Minister. Really, since this extraordinary drama began, 14 hours ago when that first exit poll emerged, David Cameron and his team have said very, very little as they've tried to work out what's going to happen, what they can do. In a traditional election, the electorate, as it were, crowns somebody Prime Minister. That hasn't happened this time, so this is when I think David Cameron reaches out and takes the crown. He has drawn already a huge crowd of people here to see what he's going to say. I don't expect that we're going to get a detailed response to any kind of Liberal Democrat shopping list, but as has been said, they're not in a hugely powerful position. He could dare them to vote down a Queen's speech. He knows, like everybody else knows, that he has to take this country through a very, very difficult economic situation. And if he can't rule, either as a minority or in some agreement with the Liberal Democrats, and there has to be an election, it's the Conservative Party that has by far the largest amount of money, the war chest for that second election, though the Labour Party, I can tell you, have also held some money back in case there's a second election. So this is a very, very tense moment. This is absolutely hardball. This is the poker. This is the most difficult moment for David Cameron in his political career, the last few hours. And I think what we're going to have now, probably David Cameron and a few members of the shadow cabinet standing in front of the country and effectively saying, we have won this election and we now demand, or we ask, for the right to be allowed to govern.
Andrew, that's absolutely fascinating, and we'll see whether that materialises. But just one thing, where are you? What is the building behind you?
It's the St Stephen's Constitutional Club. It's a place that David Cameron has used in the past for press conferences, got old Conservative links. It's in Old Queen Street. Birdcage Walk and St James's Park is just the other side. A rather elegant building inside. It's a bit like one of those old gentlemen's clubs with portraits of Churchill and so on the wall.
It's where he does his press conference, I'm telling you. It's a great deal more salubrious as a spot than standing outside Millbank, which really is a dump now, isn't it?
Absolutely. None of those sort of tacky bits of cardboard and old styrofoam cups and comatose journalists lying around on the carpet. It's classy in there.
It looks like cheap flights to Bulgaria, the front of the Tory party headquarters during the campaign. Not this. No, this is fine. This is fine.
No, this is.
Let's have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go back to Cheltenham. We will be there. Just a reminder. That's 2:30. We're expecting David Cameron to come out, and according to what we just heard, actually say in effect that he thinks he has the right to be Prime Minister. Well, we shall see. Emily Maitlis, in the meantime,
yes,
on this Cheltenham result.
We're trying to raise the tone with a spa town round here. At Cheltenham, Lib Dem hold, as you've seen. Every seat that the Conservatives don't take at this point is a major blow to the maths. So Martin Horwood holding that. This is one of the few that we were analysing before. A very, very tight Lib Dem Tory race here. Westmoreland is still to come. There are 4 other Labour Lib Dem marginals as well that we're looking at, Labour Tory marginals.
But before you move on, Emily, look at those changes. That was what most of us were expecting 24 hours ago, before we had the exit poll, before we had the results. A great Lib Dem surge, the Tories up a bit, Labour down. Had that been the story of all these Lib Dem Tory contests through the night, had we had this 4.3% swing across the board, we would now be talking about 90 or 100 Lib Dem MPs. We would be talking about a Lib-Lab coalition. So I think the Lib Dems, and indeed Labour, will be looking at this result with a certain wistfulness, saying, I wish they were all like that, but they weren't. It's exceptional.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of the night, we would have been thinking that the Clegg mania that we'd heard so much about would have surged through. Then the exit poll. Is there any indication that Westmoreland will follow a similar trend, or is that still very much up to play?
I think any of us at this stage, when we see the variety of swings in these tight Lib Dem Tory contests, any of us who isn't at the count trying to predict Westmoreland, I think is riding for a fall, Emily.
Straight back to you, David.
Thanks very much. Well, I think at this stage we should go to Jeremy Paxman while we wait for this statement from the St Stephen's Constitutional Club, Old Queen Street. Jeremy.
Well, with us now, Jonathan Powell, former Chief of Staff for Tony Blair. Tony Benn, I suppose we call you an elder statesman nowadays, don't we? Former Labour Cabinet Minister and the like. And Jim Wallace, whom we were told only a moment ago, was intimately involved in these negotiations on behalf of the Liberal Democrats. I heard you audibly wince when Nick Robinson talked about an unprecedented political crisis. What do you make of this sort of political hokey-cokey?
Well, what it isn't is a political crisis. In a European country, most other European countries, this happens after pretty much every election. So it's only a crisis if we make it into a crisis. It's interesting, it's different, it's not what we're used to, but it's no reason why it should be a political crisis.
In your experience of being inside Downing Street, is this likely to lead to a stable form of government, which we are told is what everyone is after?
It can do. It depends on the basis of the understanding between the party that forms the government and the support it has from the Liberal Party, I guess, in the end.
Now, Tony Benn, you're always concerned with authenticity and democratic accountability. Does it strike you that in these circumstances, with Gordon Brown hanging on to the Prime Ministership, he possesses democratic authenticity?
Well, I mean, the electors voted in the way they did and didn't give either of the major parties a majority, and therefore in the circumstances, the negotiations are bound to be about which of the two major parties could get enough support from a third party, and that's what's happening today. I must say, listening to it, it does make me wonder whether either of these strategies will work and whether we might not be heading for another general election, because it has changed the pattern of election results very fundamentally.
Would that be a bad thing to have another general election imminently?
Well, on the whole, the public don't really want a general election because it's a tremendous strain and I think in a way boring. On the other hand, they did vote for the parliament that is now paralysed.
They brought it on themselves.
Yeah, well, they did in a way, but at the same time, they have opened up all sorts of possibilities now in the debates, which I think may have, some of which may have a good effect.
Now, if you were to be involved or are involved in these negotiations, what sort of constructed deal could be constructed with the Conservatives?
Well, there's a whole range. I think it's unlikely that you could have a full-blown coalition. I think there's too many differences between the parties. Other countries, I think New Zealand in the past has done supply and confidence, or it may just be, take it issue by issue. I mean, let's admit, the Scottish Parliament has operated for the last 3 years with a minority government, with no formal arrangements, or some informal arrangements between the SNP and the Conservatives that no one sort of identifies too much. But I think it would be better if there was something that was open at the end of the day. And I always maintained in Scotland when we were negotiating a coalition that you actually presented to the electorate what you had agreed. And I think in the interest of stability as well, it would be better if an agreement is possible, that it's actually an open agreement.
When you heard that Gordon Brown statement, which he claimed to be making as Prime Minister and not as a party leader, did you think he was behaving honourably?
I think he was making it more as a party leader than he was as Prime Minister. I mean, some of the earlier parts of his statement, I think he was perfectly right to say he would allow Nick Clegg and David Cameron the time and the space to have that discussion. I think that was a perfectly proper thing to do. I think when it came to the pitch, it was a bit more of the leader of the Labour Party.
Did you think he was behaving honourably?
Yes, it was a statement in two halves. It was behind that door, he's got civil service advisors like Gus O'Donnell and Jeremy Hayward, and he's got political advisors. The first half of the statement was the civil service position, setting out where we stand constitutionally, and the second half was making the pitch to the Liberal Party.
But you thought it was absolutely, you've taken at face value?
It was taken at face value. It was a statement in two halves, as I say.
Now, Tony Benn, how do you imagine that a deal between Gordon Brown and the Liberal Democrats could be accomplished if it falls through with David Cameron?
Well, I think it's very uncertain at the moment, because one of the effects of the election discussion, and the Liberals have played a part in this, is to open it all up. We don't just want little deals done behind the closed doors, and therefore it may be that one effect of the whole campaign will be to make people less likely to follow the whips. And individual members of Parliament might say, I'm not going along with that, I'm not going along with this, and so the whole parliamentary situation will be more fluid. And if that is the case, then you won't be able to establish a sort of temporary stitch-up coalition with anybody, and that's where they might lead to a further election.
Well, Jim Wallace has already suggested all sorts of possibilities, but the arithmetic is so tight, isn't it?
Well, it is very tight, and that's one reason why it's so uncertain.
It's not tight if it was, I mean, the Liberal Democrats, if it was confidence and supply, and I'm purely speculating. I'm just
explain what confidence and supply is.
That an opposition party gives support to a minority government on issues of confidence. Queen's Speech would be an obvious one, and on getting the supply, getting a budget through so there's actually funds there to fund the government. I'm not saying that's what would happen, but that is possible, and obviously the numbers there would stack up more than, well, the numbers between Liberal Democrat and Labour doesn't come anywhere near a majority either.
But what would the Liberal Democrats get out of a deal like that?
Well, I don't know. You just asked me, and I said that's what it was. I'm saying there's a range of issues there, but there's Liberal Democrats, and I think it's the vast majority of the people in this country. We accept that this is a situation where we want to address the financial issues, which are overwhelmingly important. We want to see stability, and Nick Clegg was absolutely honourable. He said through the campaign, it would be obvious if there was a party that had the commanded majority, not the majority, but the most seats and the most votes, that's who he would talk to first. He's behaved with integrity. I think some suggestions that maybe he's just going through the motions, I would put that totally to one side. I think Nick Clegg, if he said that, he means that, he will talk. And it's up to David Cameron. The ball's in David Cameron's court. Nick Clegg's talked about governing in the national interest. The national interest is not the same as the Conservative Party interest, and that's the test that David Cameron's got to face.
The Liberal Democrat interest, perhaps?
Not even, we didn't, I mean, we're all minorities. Some are much bigger minorities than others. But I think it's very clear that what can be done to stabilise and to address the financial situation will be very important. Our issues of fairness are important too, but we're all minorities. And picking out one point that Nick Robinson made, he compared what he thought David Cameron might do with what Alex Salmond did in 2007. Alex Salmond, as leader of the SNP, helicoptered into Edinburgh, announced he was the winner. He'd only actually one more seat than the Labour Party, and the media bought it. To be fair, the opposition parties bought it too. And I don't think David Cameron really should be allowed to get away with it. He didn't win.
He hasn't tried it yet.
No, I know. But
it's probably too late to try it now,
Nick Robinson was suggesting he might, but no one won.
Can Gordon Brown continue any length of time in 10 Downing Street?
Can he continue what?
In Downing Street.
Well, I mean, if they're at the end of these negotiations, we'll know where we are. I mean, if Cameron reached an agreement with Clegg, then truthfully there would be, the Labour government would have come to an end. If, on the other hand, that fails and Brown reached an agreement with Clegg, then there would be a further life ahead as leader of a coalition.
I've got to hand back to you, David.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's because we have the result coming in from Westmoreland and Lonsdale.
Declaring the result
this is Liberal Democrat hold and the Conservatives challenge, number 13 on their list, on their target list for the Tories. 806 was the previous majority, so a very close run thing. Tim Farron is the Liberal Democrat.
Tim Farron, Liberal Democrats, 30,896. John Malcolm Mander, UK Independence Party, 801. Gareth McKeever, the Conservative Party candidate, 18,632. Jonathan William Todd, the Labour Party candidate 1,158. There were 82 spoilt ballot papers.
Right, well, the Liberal Democrats could have done with a lot more like that. Their majority went up by 11,000, from 800 to 12,264 this time round. So a big change there. The Liberal Democrat vote went up by 14 percentage points, the Conservatives down 8, Labour down 6, and the swing to the Liberal Democrats from the Conservative, 11.1%. Emily.
Yeah, well, that's a second in a row then for the Lib Dems, a hold. They'll be very pleased with the swing here. As you were saying, a big leap for the Lib Dems and a swing of 11%. Tim Farron holding on here, a popular MP, having resigned from the front bench at one point and brought instantly back again.
And our prediction half an hour ago assumed that the Tories would take one of these two seats, Cheltenham or Westmoreland. The Liberals have held both. There are 4 Labour marginals to come. We're assuming Labour will keep 2, the Tories will take 2. If Labour holds all 4, it does move the arithmetic. The Tories are up with 304 seats, Lib plus Lab 318, a 14 gap, where a little while ago we were assuming a 6 or 8 gap. In these coalition talks, these fine numbers really do matter.
Yeah, what that means mathematically is that the Conservatives can't have a majority, we're now understanding, of more than 308. That is the total number of seats they can now get. David.
Emily, thank you very much indeed. Well, we're waiting now to go down to Old Queen Street to hear the leader of the Conservative Party, who's going to speak inside, apparently, at... They always look like Baptist chapels, these things they speak from, don't they? But anyway, he'll be here, and we think at 2:30. Don't know whether he's going to take questions. Noticeably, the Prime Minister didn't. He just went into Downing Street and spoke and then walked back in. But we shall see. So it's a good result for the Liberal Democrats, that one.
Well, it's just again...
how's the mathematics going now?
Well, the mathematics go that it looks like that when the dust is settled, when we get the final results, Conservatives and Liberal Democrats will be on 315, so officially 11 short of an overall majority.
Sorry, Conservatives and Liberal Democrats?
Sorry, Labour and the Liberal Democrats combined will be on 315, and you add in the SDLP MPs who take the Labour whip, and you add in, you're getting into that territory where you're pretty close to a majority. You take out of the fact that you've also got the Speaker, 2 Deputy Speakers, and you could find yourself playing. Sorry?
The Sinn Féin MPs aren't likely to come.
Don't come.
But none of these calculations alter my basic view that this Parliament is not viable and that we'll be seeing a second general election before too long.
Yes, and I think the tag that will be attached to it, if there was a Labour Liberal Democrat deal, the alliance of the losers, where both parties have been seen to have lost seats and lost ground with the electorate, yet still form a government. I mean, one of the odd phrases that we heard a lot of from Gordon Brown and senior Labour people, which I don't think got sufficiently challenged during this campaign, was the anti-Conservative majority. Well, when was there ever a Labour majority? And that, I mean, there's an anti-Labour majority in every election that there's been. If you look at it on the number of votes that were cast against the Labour Party.
But the price tag would be a referendum on a new electoral system.
Yes, but it's whether the Conservatives can go forward and say, OK, we'll have a referendum, we'll campaign against it, but we'll grant you the referendum. And whether that is enough for Nick Clegg to say, OK, I'll take that.
I think it would be very difficult for David Cameron to bring his party behind a referendum on electoral reform.
Yeah, of course, there are going to be huge pressures on all of those things. I mean, I think, but this is the game that's now in play about how much notice does David Cameron have to take of his party, how many people are going to break cover, and noisily. I mean, we heard Andrew Neil earlier saying that there were going to be very senior figures coming out to say there must be nothing on it. Haven't heard them yet.
All right,
so
let's have a look at the Conservative share. Jeremy, can you do that for us?
Yeah, let's do that very quickly, David. I'm inside the staircase at number 10 Downing Street again, and you can see the portraits on the walls, and we'll take a look here at some of these Conservative Prime Ministers and Anthony Eden. This is just to check really what Conservatives win with. 49.6% in 1955, 58-seat majority. And then Harold Macmillan, again, just under 50%, 1959, 100-seat majority for him. And then we had that very tight 1974 election in February. Heath, 37.8%. And up the stairs we go here, up and down these stairs at Downing Street. Thatcher's first win, 1979. Now here we have this sequence of 3 Thatcher landslides. We're looking really at share that the Conservative leaders got as they became Prime Minister, and it's notable that to win they were getting over 40%. So 79 Thatcher landslide, 43.9%. 83, second landslide for Mrs Thatcher, 42.4%. 87, third landslide for Mrs Thatcher, 42.2%. So you see the pattern, over 40% makes a Tory Prime Minister, and that's been almost a rule for these years since. Then you have, in 1992, John Major winning, again over 40%, 21-seat majority there. And then the 97 Blair landslide sees John Major crashing here to 30.7%. So we're trying to fit David Cameron into this sequence, knowing as we do, take out maybe the first ones where there was no Liberal Party and the Conservative share was nearly 50%. Look at the 3 Thatcher landslides. Look at that John Major win. It's over 40%. How do we fit in this? This is the Cameron performance. 36% in this election. And the answer is that we may need to look at a different sequence. Let's look at the sequence when the Conservatives were out of power because of Tony Blair's government. 2001, William Hague, 32.7%. Then Michael Howard does a little bit better. 2005, 33.2%. So an improvement. And then the next leader, there he is, David Cameron, 36%. So that, in a way, is a progression that leads David Cameron to the position he's now in. But he clearly is falling short. The Conservatives saying this is an amazing jump in seats. It's very, very good for them. But it's not in the kind of territory that Mrs Thatcher was in with her landslides, or even John Major when he won that extraordinary election in 1992. So from that point of view, they are falling short. David.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. We're still keeping an eye on the venue for David Cameron's statement, which is coming, we think, at 2:30. We'll keep an eye on that and we'll go to it as soon as it happens. Meantime, the Speaker of the House of Commons joins Jeremy Paxman.
Ah, yes. Now, John Bercow, well, congratulations. A hell of a fight, I imagine, wasn't it?
Well, I take all of these fights seriously, Jeremy, as you will understand, and nobody should ever take the electorate for granted. I'm delighted to have been returned with a sizable majority to continue serving the people of Buckingham.
Tell us from the Speaker's point of view what it would be like to manage Parliament, which was built upon alliances of intrinsic unpredictability. Are you hearing me still?
It's gone haywire.
Yeah, well, we're doing our best. Can you hear me now, John Bercow?
Further down or not?
Are you still I'm still haywire, you're still haywire? You're not hearing me. OK, we'll get back to you in a minute or two. David.
All right, well, I'm joined here, and I don't know whether I'll have a chance to talk to them before David Cameron speaks, but by Lord Armstrong, who was involved in the negotiations intimately in February '74 with Edward Heath, as Private Secretary to Heath and then Cabinet Secretary. That's correct?
Private Secretary Heath and then later Cabinet Secretary.
I love that Lord Armstrong wrote a document which is labelled secret, but it's now been released, which is the most fascinating insight into the tiny details as well as the principles that applied here. I hope you won't mind my teasing you a bit with Sir John and Sir Michael and I had a glass of sherry with Sir John Hunt and then went out to lunch at the Giulietta Romeo restaurant in Soho. And there's a very good passage where you try to get hold of the Liberals, Jeremy Thorpe, Liberal then, not a Liberal Democrat, and he doesn't answer the telephone because he says the telephone isn't working. But this is the authentic document of the procedure, isn't it, for what Ted Heath did and how you communicated with the palace about what the Prime Minister's intentions were.
It was a fully detailed account of what happened in that weekend from the 1st to the 4th of March '74, from the middle of it, as it were, because I was in touch obviously with Heath and with the Queen's Private Secretary and with Jeremy Thorpe.
And what lessons do you think from this should apply to the present situation?
Well, I think the present situation is very different. In '74, there was only a 4-seat difference between the Conservative and the Labour votes, number of seats, and of course the Conservatives actually had more votes in the country than Labour, and the Liberals there were only 14 of them. So that the balances were very different from what they are now, with something like 45 seat difference between the Conservative and the Labour, and the Liberals with over 50 seats.
And indeed, they would have needed the Ulster Unionists as well to support them to have had a majority in the House of Commons.
Well, of course, that was not very likely, because the Ulster Unionist price would have been a change on Sunningdale, which
yes.
Heath would not have wanted to concede.
But are you saying or implying that there was a legitimacy to the process that Ted Heath went through of trying to get together a coalition that would allow him to stay in office, and that there's not a legitimacy for Gordon Brown, the present Prime Minister, to do the same sort of thing?
No, I think it is legitimate. I thought that what the Gordon Brown said just now was both statesmanlike and realistic. If the Conservatives have the largest number of seats, they're going to go in first with the Liberal Democrats. If that fails, he's ready to talk. And that seemed to me to be a perfectly reasonable position to take.
We're about to hear from David Cameron. He's going to come through that door at the press conference and make a statement. And I'm told that Nick Clegg is likely to speak afterwards, so we shall have another position from the Liberal Democrats. But just while we wait for him to come through, what advice would you give to the people at Number 10 who are negotiating, from your experience, about how this should all be conducted? I mean, a weekend of silence while they talk?
I thought what Gordon Brown said, give it time. The pressure under which people are operating, and of course after yesterday the sleeplessness under which they're operating, don't make for good decisions. It would be sensible to take time about it, at least over the weekend. I don't think we can wait longer than Monday or Tuesday because of the state of the markets. But I don't think we ought to be under pressure, put the leaders under pressure to make a decision today or tomorrow.
And you said that it was statesmanlike, what Gordon Brown said. Is it your view that he would quite happily accept, I don't mean happily in the political sense, but that if Cameron and the Liberal Democrats came to a deal, he would simply tender his resignation to the Queen and say game's up?
That was the way I read it, or heard it.
Simon Sharma.
I thought that too as well, David. I mean, I think the real issue is actually what's the relationship of the two pieces of the puzzle that are really on the table, the economic crisis piece and the political reform piece. Clearly, the Liberals and perhaps the Labour Party now think if you sort out this burning issue of unfairness, it might help the economic situation. But of course, you know, the opposite may be said and will be said by David Cameron, that top of the agenda is the stabilisation of a very difficult economic situation. And therefore, a principled stand in opposing even a referendum is essentially the right thing to do for the national interest.
And so we could actually get to a stalemate here today at any rate.
We might have poker while the house burns down. And as Lord Armstrong says, Monday and Tuesday will be absolutely critical.
Well, Lord Armstrong said we should have a government by Monday because of the markets, and that may be right. But we may not have a definitive government until the Queen's Speech debate on the 25th of May, because it may not be clear until then, in particular, how some of the minor parties will act. And it may not be clear whether there's a coalition agreement or any other sort of agreement. If Cameron goes to Parliament then as a minority, it won't be clear that he can survive until there is a vote on the Queen's Speech.
It has to be said that the FTSE seems to be quite sanguine about what's going on. It's dropped 30 points only. There doesn't seem to be a sort of run on sterling of the old kind, or the stock market crashes, or government bonds can't be sold. On the contrary, everybody seems either they've assumed this might happen and have discounted it, or at any rate they're not panicking.
I think they may have discounted it. They're probably prepared to wait. Whether they would want to wait as long as the debate on the Queen's Speech, I don't know. I would hope that it would become clear before then whether there was likely to be a stable arrangement between one of the big parties and the Lib Dems.
One of the intentions of the Prime Minister having the procedure laid out in advance and all that was to avoid embroiling the palace in the political decisions that were made. Do you think it's possible in all circumstances, when you have this kind of election result that we've got here, not to embroil the palace? Is it always possible to keep the palace out of it, the Queen out of it?
Well, it wasn't in 1931, clearly, but I think in modern times, yes, it is. It's extremely desirable that the Queen should be operating on the basis of a political consensus.
David Cameron now.
Good afternoon,
preceded
everybody.
by members of his shadow
yesterday's
cabinet.
general election, the Conservative Party gained more seats than at any election for the last 80 years. I'm incredibly proud not only of the strong result that we achieved, but of the strong and positive campaign that we fought. We campaigned for hope, not fear, and people responded to that, giving us 2 million more votes than Labour. We campaigned for change, not more of the same, and people responded to that, giving us a higher share of the vote than Labour achieved at the last election when they won a majority of 60. There are many great new Conservative members of Parliament who will be coming to the House of Commons, and I am very proud this will be a new, modern Conservative Party in Parliament. I know it will make a huge difference to our politics, to all those Conservative Party supporters, members and activists who fought so hard, not just in the last few weeks, but in the last few years. I want to say a huge thank you, and to remind you how proud you can be of the result, a bigger increase in seats than even Margaret Thatcher achieved in 1979. The worst loss of seats for Labour than at any general election since 1931, and a share of the vote not far off what Michael Foot got in 1983. But however much pride we can take in that enormous advance, we have to accept that we fell short of an overall majority. As I said last night, Britain needs strong, stable, decisive government, and it is in the national interest that we get that on a secure basis. We are at war in Afghanistan with our troops putting their lives at risk for us every day. We are facing a financial and economic situation of great seriousness as a result of our dangerous debts and our deficit. We need a government that reassures the international markets. We need policies that will bring economic recovery. And we need a government that understands that great change is needed in order to restore faith in our political system. Britain voted for change yesterday, but it also voted for a new politics. It did not vote for party political bickering, grandstanding and point scoring. Our country's problems are too serious, they are too urgent for that. So we must all rise to this occasion. We must show leadership. We must sort things out as quickly as possible for the good of the country. Nick Clegg has said that because the Conservative Party won the most votes and the most seats in this election, we should have the chance to form a government. And I thank him for that. So we will now begin talks with other parties to see how that can be done. One option would be to give other parties reassurances about certain policy areas and then seek their agreement to allow a minority Conservative government to continue in office without the country constantly facing the threat of its government falling. This is what is known as a confidence and supply arrangement. It has been done before, and yes, we can try to do it again. But I am prepared to consider alternative options. It may be possible to have stronger, more stable, more collaborative government than that. There is a case for going further than arrangement, which simply keeps a minority Conservative government in office. So I want to make a big, open and comprehensive offer to the Liberal Democrats. I want us to work together in tackling our country's big and urgent problems, the debt crisis, our deep social problems, and our broken political system. Let me explain my thinking. First, it is right and reasonable to acknowledge that, of course, there are policy disagreements between us, many of which were highlighted in those television debates. To fellow Conservatives who fought and campaigned and worked so hard to achieve the massive advance we've made in this campaign, I want to make it clear that I do not believe any government should give more powers to the European Union. I do not believe that any government can be weak or soft on the issue of immigration, which needs to be controlled properly. And the country's defences must be kept strong. I also believe that on the basis of the election result that we achieved, it is reasonable to expect that the bulk of the policies in our manifesto should be implemented. But across our two manifestos, there are many areas of common ground. And there are areas, I believe, that we in the Conservative Party can give ground, both in the national interest and in the interest of forging an open and trusting partnership. We share a strong desire to make opportunity more equal in this country, and I recognise the high priority that the Liberal Democrats have given to the proposal for a pupil premium in our schools. We agree with this idea. It is in our manifesto too, and I'm sure we can develop a common approach that recognises the urgency that the Liberal Democrats have attached to this proposal. The Liberal Democrats in their manifesto have made the achievement of a low-carbon economy an absolute priority, and we support this aim. I'm sure we can agree a common plan to achieve it. The Liberal Democrats have also made proposals to reform our tax system. We both agree that Labour's jobs tax, as the Liberal Democrats manifesto puts it, is a damaging tax on jobs, and we would seek to reverse it. It has always been an aspiration for the Conservative Party to reduce taxes, especially on those who earn the least. And we are happy to give this aim a much higher priority and to work together to determine how it can be afforded. We share a common commitment to civil liberties and to getting rid, immediately, of Labour's ID card scheme. On our political system, we agree with the Liberal Democrats that reform is urgently needed to help restore trust, and that reform must include the electoral system. The Liberal Democrats have their ideas, we have our ideas. For example, that all seats should be of equal size so that votes can have an equal value in a first-past-the-post system. And other parties have constructive proposals to put forward as well. So I believe we will need an all-party committee of inquiry on political and electoral reform. So I think we have a strong basis for a strong government. Inevitably, the negotiations we're about to start will involve compromise. That is what working together in the national interest means. But no government will be in the national interest unless it deals with the biggest threat to our national interest, and that is the deficit. We remain completely convinced that starting to deal with the deficit this year is essential. This has been more than confirmed by recent events in other European countries, recent instability in the markets, and recent conversations that we have had with both the Treasury and the Bank of England. The national interest is clear. The world is looking to Britain for decisive action. The new government must grip this deficit and prevent the economic catastrophe that would result from putting off the difficult and the urgent action that needs to be taken. So our big, open and comprehensive offer to the Liberal Democrats involves helping them to implement key planks of their election manifesto, providing the country with economic as well as political stability, and finding further ways in which Liberal Democrats can be involved in making this happen. The outgoing Labour government has left this country with terrible problems: an economic and financial crisis, deep social problems, a political system in which too many people have lost faith. The new government will face the worst inheritance of any incoming government for at least 60 years. That is exactly why it's so important that we have strong, stable government that lasts. A strong, stable government which has the support of the public to take the difficult decisions that are needed if we're going to put this country back on the right track for a stronger future. There is one further point I want to make. I believe that it's not just important for this country to have strong and stable government, it's important that we get that strong and stable government quickly. So I hope we can reach agreement quickly on the big, open and comprehensive offer that I've outlined today. As I argued in this general election campaign, I think this is a great country, but we could be doing so much better. We don't have to settle for the debt and the waste and the taxes left to us by Labour. We can put behind us the economic incompetence, the social breakdown, the political division, and the mistrust that are the poisonous legacy of 13 years of Labour misrule. Of course, I hoped that a Conservative majority would be the outcome of this election, and that we could have started today making the changes that I believe our country so badly needs. I know how much the Conservative Party itself, all my colleagues in Parliament, all the loyal members and activists around the country wanted that too. But I also know they wanted something more than that. They want the best for Britain. The Conservative Party has always been a party that puts the national interest first. And the best thing, the national interest thing, the best thing for Britain now is a new government that works together in that national interest. And I hope with all my heart that is something that we can achieve. That is all I have to say for now. I hope you'll understand that I won't be taking questions, but this urgent work must begin. Thank you.
David Cameron, the leader of the Conservative Party, with the backing of the seats and the popular vote that he talked about behind him, refusing to take questions, goes out of that room having made this, what he called a big open offer to the Liberal Democrats, talked about the outgoing Labour government very pointedly, in effect restated the Conservative Party's position on a whole range of issues, and then said that on a lot of these things the Liberal Democrats could agree. On electoral reform in particular, he offered an all-party committee inquiry, and he did say that negotiations would involve compromise. But broadly, it seemed to me to be a restatement of the Conservative position, but asking the Liberals to come and join them, and making it absolutely clear he wanted agreement quickly in the national interest, and that a new government was needed. This Labour government was the outgoing government.
I thought it was fascinating of what he grasped on electoral reform, this promise of a committee of inquiry, and I wonder whether that goes far enough. But I wonder whether in saying that, David Cameron's outriders had already spoken to people in the Liberal Democrats to see whether that would be sufficient for them as an initial move, and we can see there David Cameron leaving the scene. So he's offered this thing on the committee of inquiry, but is that any different to what the Liberal Democrats were offered when Roy Jenkins looked at this prior to 1997? And that will be a central question.
Well, you can have committee of inquiries, they go on forever, but they don't have any guarantees attached to them. Perhaps they're not worth the paper they're written on or the words that they're spoken with. Nick, I was saying that the key thing he said was the outgoing Labour government, but actually it seemed this big open offer to the Liberal Democrats to be broadly a restatement of the Conservative position during the election, and simply saying the Liberals could join them and he would make compromise, or they could negotiate and there'd be compromise. Is that broadly right, do you think?
Yes, the key question though was he talking about just a deal or a coalition? I put that to a number of senior members of the Cheddar Cabinet as I dashed out here. Wait and see, they said. They are not, in other words, ruling out a coalition with places for Liberal Democrats in a David Cameron-led government on the basis not of a promise to change the electoral system, but as you've been saying, to look at it, but to make agreements on tax, on the pupil premium as it's called, and a whole range of other areas. So he will hope that even if this is an offer that is rejected, it is seen as a sincere and genuine attempt to do a deal. He will know in his mind that if it's turned down, that will give him a little greater legitimacy if he then argues that he wants to govern simply as a minority government.
And he did talk about the disagreements, more power to the EU, immigration, defence, presumably referring to Trident. So he made it clear that there were areas of disagreement which didn't sound as though they were going to be reconcilable to him. Where would he be able, do you think, to shift the balance of what the Tories stand for in order to accommodate the Liberal Democrats, apart from this issue of a committee to look at all-party inquiry into electoral reform?
Well, this may be beyond that. Obviously, we've heard what he said about tax cuts for poorer people. Now, that's no problem for a Tory government to say that it wants to look in. We've heard him say that he wants to give more resource to the poorest pupils, what's called the pupil premium. So there will be other areas that they can look at. Now, I doubt very much that the Liberal Democrat Party will want to embrace this idea of a coalition with him. More likely, though, and this is the big calculation that Nick Clegg and his party now have to make, is that they might be tempted, in effect, to let him govern. In other words, not to bring him down when it comes to a budget or a Queen's speech, allowing them not to be tainted by the decisions that they don't like that a Tory government might take, and also to bargain and negotiate line by line, item by item on other areas, and then go to the public at an election, and we all expect one way before the 4 or 5 years we normally expect, go to the electorate and then say, this is what we managed to deliver by the relationship we've got. Now that's the decision the Lib Dems have got to take. Would they rather stay out of government, able to influence things in that way, or do they take an offer that some will find it hard to refuse, to go in with Labour, get a change in the electoral system, much more likely that route, but on the other hand, they could be tainted by a relationship with a government that's been in office for 13 years and has just been rejected by the voters.
We did report a rumour that Nick Clegg was going to follow David Cameron's speech with a statement. It seems to me highly unlikely and would be very unwise of Nick Clegg at this stage to come out and make another speech about the Liberal Democrats' intention. Presumably they'll go into private discussions, won't they?
That's exactly right. I mean, I don't know for certain that Nick Clegg is not doing a statement, but I'd be amazed if he did. He needs to think very, very carefully indeed. Now, he's not thinking for the first time, David. I mean, we've been talking about the possibility of a hung parliament for many, many months. Nick Clegg has not been in government. He's had enormous amounts of time to prepare for each of these eventualities. I'd be very surprised indeed if there are not major negotiating documents already written by the Liberal Democrats. When, for example, the Scottish parliamentary elections happened, the first set in 1999, the Labour Party was shocked when a man came in from the Liberal Democrats with a 24-page negotiating document in detail, not just on the areas that we're familiar with, but micro details about wind farms and energy policy and all the rest of it, in order to have a negotiating statement that they felt they could secure their own interests. So a lot of work and preparation has gone on. The one thing that has not gone on, and that's what has to happen now, is trying to look at what the party will let him do. Now, yesterday we would have said that Nick Clegg could pretty much do what he liked. He was walking on water. Well, he sunk rather today, didn't he? Because the results are a major disappointment to him and his party. So he is no longer in a position to say, I want to do this, follow me. He, just like David Cameron, will have to woo his party. Last thought, David, I was very, very struck by the repeated attempts of the Tory leader to reassure his own party, who'd be very nervous about a deal with the Liberal Democrats, reassuring them on immigration, on Europe, yes, on Trident as well, and ending up by trying to appeal, particularly to an older generation of Conservative activists, by saying, look, we, the Conservatives, he was arguing, always do what's in the country's interest first.
Do you think he'll be able to hold his party intact? Do you think we'll start to hear dissenting voices?
Oh, you may have critics, but there's nothing to concentrate the mind like the possibility of losing office when it might be on offer. There are an awful lot of people who will tell you that David Cameron's messed this up or messed that up, and why did he do the debates? Why wasn't the campaign better? You know what we're talking about today, David? We're talking about power. We are talking about whether you have it or you don't, whether you get to carry out your policies or you don't. And I suspect there are quite a lot of Tories who may be quite angry. They'll realise that.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. Jeremy's got guests with him to comment on what was said. Jeremy.
Indeed, and preeminently, let's talk first of all to you, being Campbell, very senior Liberal Democrat. You find it attractive?
Well, there have been two offers made this afternoon, one by the Prime Minister.
All right, which do you prefer?
Well, the Liberal Democrat MPs will meet tomorrow and they'll consider all of these matters.
But didn't you like the noises that David Cameron was making? He was using words like being involved. I mean, that might even mean cabinet posts or something.
Well, there's a lot of ambiguity in what was said. And if you take the issues of Trident, of immigration in Europe, there are very fundamental differences. And of course, if you come to the issue of an inquiry into electoral reform, we've been round that course. We were round that course with Labour, with the Jenkins Commission.
So none of it appealed to you at all?
Well, the fact that this offer is made in this form, what is it, open and comprehensive, that is obviously something which will be very carefully considered.
And you're playing hard to get.
Well, I'm taking him at face value, just as you would expect him to take what the Prime Minister said a little earlier at face value, and to decide whether or not any agreement of any kind foreshadowed by either of them is in the national interest.
For you, you'd need more on electoral reform, would you?
There's no doubt that electoral reform is right at the very heart of the Liberal Democrat view about what is necessary to help to clean up politics. We've been down that course before. We had an inquiry before. What happened to it?
We want a commitment.
It went into a pigeonhole somewhere in the Home Office and never reappeared again. And indeed, it was of such significance that it led to a pretty major falling out between Roy Jenkins and Tony Blair.
So you would want a firm commitment from a Conservative government that it would, at the very least, offer a referendum on electoral reform.
Proportional representation is an important plank in the Liberal Democrats' view of how the country's politics should be reordered to try and recreate a connection between public and politicians. It lies right at the very heart of that, and as the results in the election that's just finished show, and indeed as the attitude of the public throughout the campaign shows, there's increasing support for the importance of proportional representation.
Okay, you've got Jeff Hume, just retired Labour MP, former cabinet minister, and Douglas Carswell, active Conservative MP, sitting on either side of you. Douglas Carswell, could you live with the idea of a referendum on electoral reform?
Speaking personally, yes. Having contributed a number of the ideas that David Cameron has taken up and put in the manifesto on the Great Repeal Bill, on radical localism, I find myself being contacted by Liberal Democrats saying it's their idea all along, so let's work together.
And you can live with all the other ideas that David Cameron outlined?
Well, speaking personally,
yes.
I've changed my mind on electoral reform. 5 years ago, if you had asked me, do we need to change, I would have said no. But 5 years in the House of Commons has convinced me we need to change our electoral system.
Jeff, when you heard that speech from David Cameron, he looked and he sounded like a real leader, didn't he?
I think all three leaders today have been very, very impressive. They've all set out the principles. What's important now is that they translate those principles into practice.
But when you look at Gordon Brown, here's a man who inherited office. You couldn't get rid of him, other plotters couldn't get rid of him, and now he's lost an election. Does that strike you as a man who's fit to stay in Downing Street?
But I thought his statement encapsulated precisely what the country is looking for. And as I say, the challenge for all three of them is to find a way of translating those admirable statements of principle into practical reality.
OK, chaps, I've got to hand back to David Dimbleby. David.
Jeremy, thank you very much. Well, let's just have a reminder of what the statements that everybody's talking about were, just in brief, a précis of them. David Cameron's, first of all, what he called a comprehensive offer to the Liberal Democrats, set up a committee on electoral reform, repeal Labour's national insurance rise, and no compromise on Europe or defence issues. He made that fairly clear. And the Brown statement, economic recovery is the priority. He said that Clegg and Cameron should have time to discuss the possibility of cooperating together. Legislation was needed to reform the voting system, and people should decide the outcome of that in a referendum. Nobody's being very clear at this stage about what kind of change to the voting system they want. One offers an all-party committee, the other says there'll be a referendum of the people on it.
I just dug out some previous David Cameron quotes on PR, which is quite interesting. You know, asked by Ben Brogan from The Telegraph whether he'd accept a referendum on PR, Cameron says, "We're not proposing a referendum on PR because we don't support PR. It would be rather strange to have a referendum on things you don't support. We don't want PR and we don't want a referendum on PR." But he doesn't actually say, under no circumstances will we. I mean, he doesn't say never in any of the quotes that I can find. Does he like PR? No, he doesn't. Would he prefer to keep first past the post? Yes, he would. But I still think there is an area of ambiguity there from David Cameron which just about leaves the door ajar. But I mean, I'm sure that Nick Clegg's people, and one of their spokesmen has said, very interesting, but we're not going to say any more for the time being about what David Cameron has said. I think they will want to know that a committee of inquiry into this is going to go somewhere and go somewhere quickly.
Would it be acceptable to the Tories, do you think? It doesn't sound as though it would be, to say, we'll offer you, the Liberal Democrats, a referendum on any whatever form of proportional representation we come up with, and we know that a lot of the suggestions from Labour are not actually proportional representation, the alternative vote and all that. We'll offer you a referendum, but we reserve the right to urge the country to vote against it. Do you think that would be acceptable?
Well, that may well satisfy them. You're not. I don't think Nick Clegg would say, "I'm sorry, and I'm going to dragoon the Conservative government and ministers into outwardly campaigning for PR." But it may be, if he gets his referendum, he'll be happy with that.
All right, well, David Cameron has described the hung parliament that he's got in the past as muddle and fudge. Muddle and fudge is what has resulted from this election. Muddle and fudge, Andrew.
has resulted from this election. Muddle and fudge, Andrew.
Thank you, David. Let's see if it is muddle and fudge. We've got Conservative commentator James Delingpole, Conservative member of the European Parliament Dan Hannan, and certainly not a Conservative, Alistair Campbell. I think I saw you in the early hours of this morning.
You did, on the
You're
boat.
looking better on it than me. Do you get the sense that there's the makings of a deal being done here? Maybe not a formal one, but at least an informal arrangement?
Well, it's obvious that David Cameron wants to sit down and talk to Nick Clegg, but I think for Liberal Democrats, they'll have spotted two very, very big holes in what he was offering. One is on Europe, where he's making clear he doesn't really want to change his policy on Europe at all, which I think would be very difficult for the Liberal Democrats. And there was not much there on electoral reform. And I think that Liberal Democrat activists and campaigners who've been campaigning for the Lib Dems around the last few, in the last few weeks will actually have heard Gordon Brown making very, very strong message on electoral reform, which, as Min Campbell said in the earlier discussion there, goes to the heart of what the Liberal Democrat vision for Britain is.
Is Gordon Brown still in this game?
I believe that Gordon Brown, I agree with Jeff Hoon, I think all the three leaders have actually conducted themselves extremely well today. It's a very difficult moment for the country. The country has voted, probably expected to wake up this morning with a clear result one way or the other. We haven't got it. I can't remember anything like it. I don't know if you can. And I think that what the leaders now have to do is genuinely to try to stand back from their own self-interest and try to work out a way forward. But I think there's certainly a possibility, I would have thought, that Nick Clegg will seeing what Gordon Brown was offering there, and I suspect he'll be feeling. Look, I do feel sorry for Nick Clegg. He's between a rock and a hard place. He didn't do as well as he thought he was going to. He's probably extremely disappointed about that. He now feels that he's sitting there with David Cameron making one set of suggestions to him as to how he might conduct himself in the next few days. Gordon Brown making a very different set of suggestions, and ultimately Nick Clegg can decide in a way who the next Prime Minister is.
Is he still in the game or not?
I believe that Gordon is, yeah.
What does he do next then? I mean, is he the king in the castle, just sitting there on his own, while these two rival peasant armies I think cozy up to each other?
No, I mean...
What should he do?
Well, he's the Prime Minister, as he said in his statement in Downing Street, which I thought was very measured and statesmanlike. Alistair Darling is having involved in discussions today, potentially making very big decisions about the European economy.
Sure.
He has to carry on doing that.
But what does he do as regards putting a government together?
In the meantime, he has to let David Cameron and Nick
Clegg
have those discussions.
Okay.
And I think that people will understand there is a government there. That's how our constitution works.
All right. James Delingpole, how far can David Cameron go and keep his party?
I think it sounds to me like we're going to pay a terrible price for David Cameron's failure to win a working majority. It looks like our countryside is going to be carpeted with wind farms to appease all the greenies and the Lib Dems. I'm glad that he's decided he wants to keep the one really good Conservative policy in his manifesto, which is Michael Gove's education reforms, and it's good to see that the Lib Dems are sympathetic to that, because I think that could make a difference.
What happens if he goes further than just another committee of inquiry, which I suggest will not placate the Liberal Democrats on electoral reform? Does he split the Conservatives wide open on that?
He already has.
He already has, Alistair.
I think he already has. I mean, the buzz is there are already senior Conservatives who are telling him he cannot go further than he's going there.
He's got to find a fudging formula, hasn't he? I don't think they're going to buy PR, but they might go for some compromise formula.
What do you make of it?
Well, I don't think we should treat electoral reform as synonymous with PR. There are lots of ways in which we can ameliorate the political system here. Recall votes, referendums. Well, hang on. There's a lot of common ground, I think, between what a lot of the Lib Dems have said about dispersing power, democratising power, more power for local governments, shift in power from the executive to the legislature, which I would very much go along with. Like Douglas, they were ideas...
Would you go along with PR?
I think that it is not the top thing. But I'm always and everywhere in favour. Andrew, I am always and everywhere in favour of referendums. And the great thing about referendums is that they're very often the basis of your because both sides are going to win.
And it said, do you want PR or no? Would you vote or not? Would you vote yes or no?
It depends on the system, right? I'm certainly not one who says our current system is rotten and any change would be better. I can see some improvements. I could theoretically see a better system, but until we've actually got a concrete proposal on the table, I think it would be silly to come out and say that. I must just disagree with one thing which Jeff Hoon and then Alistair Campbell said, which is that they're all in the game, they're all behaving in a statesman-like way. I'm not sure, I'm afraid, that that's true. I don't want to be churlish, but I'm not sure that is true of Gordon Brown. You know, the umpire has raised his finger pretty comprehensively, and to be in the crease saying, I'm not moving,
let's stick with Mr. Cameron, because that's the dynamic for this afternoon. How much further, if at all, can David Cameron go to try and get some kind of arrangement with the Liberal Democrats?
I think the main point he made, and this has got to be true, whatever party you're in, is that the critical thing is our financial crisis. I mean, we are months, maybe weeks away from being Greece. So our deficit is going to be bigger than theirs next year, right? So whichever party you're in, we have got to do something to bring the overspend under control. And I hope that there will be patriotic people in all three parties who will understand that there are unpopular decisions that will need to be made and that we will make these decisions collectively.
Do you feel that there is the makings of almost a formal coalition there with the Liberal Democrats, or is it more likely to be an informal arrangement? We agree together with a number of these things, we'll do these things, we'll try to avoid doing some things we don't agree about.
First of all, obviously that decision is going to be made way above my pay grade, and it's going to come down to jobs and so on. No, I know.
What do you think?
Sure, I'm not going to be paid.
Give us a view.
And therefore I can be impartial about it, since I can't get a job since I don't sit in this parliament. But I think there is the basis of putting together some kind of entente on civil liberties, on the economy, and on localism and direct democracy, which, if you like, is a kind of electoral reform, which may not be changing the voters. Look, when people talk about changing the political system, they don't usually mean rigging the votes to help this or that party. They mean shifting power from MPs to the rest of us. You know, the long parliament has failed, and we want renewal.
Alistair Campbell?
I think there's another point I would make here is that I think people will have a pretty fair sense of where the centre of gravity in the Labour Party is with the new Parliamentary Labour Party. I think in the Conservative Party, I think a lot of the new MPs coming in are going to be maybe on the Daniel Hannan wing of the party, which will make life quite difficult.
They're Thatcher's children.
I think a lot of them are, and I think that will make life difficult for David Cameron. And likewise with the Lib Dems, as anybody who's ever campaigned against them knows, they kind of tend to be parties within a party. So I think it's hard for Nick Clegg to sort of get a homogenous whole that then goes into these negotiations. So I think all of the leaders are going to find these next few days difficult. But look, I don't accept this idea that Gordon Brown doesn't have legitimacy to be the Prime Minister now, because nobody won the election outright.
No, he's still the Prime Minister.
No, but he's lost it more badly, Alistair, hasn't he? I mean, the worst defeat for 80 years.
We've got to go back
the worst defeat for 80 years. To say I'm staying is a bit much.
Hold on, Dan. You had your chance. I want Alistair Campbell here. If some kind of arrangement does come between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives, either formal or more likely an informal kind of agreement, who goes to tell Gordon Brown the game's up? Is that you and Peter Mandelson?
No, I think Gordon is a very, very intelligent guy.
You have to put your tin helmet on?
I think Gordon's he's a very, very intelligent guy. And I think, look, we all know that Nick Clegg is currently in a very, very important position where ultimately, in a way, he can decide an awful lot about the future government, and I think Gordon will be able to read a message as clearly as anybody else.
I'll take it that you're going to give him a nudge, though, in these circumstances. Let's go back to David in the studio.
Thanks, Andrew. Now, Dudley North has got stuck. We haven't had a result there. They've been counting for hours and hours and hours. Claire Marshall is there to explain what's happened. This is a seat held by Labour with a majority of 4,000 in the West Midlands. Claire, what's exactly gone on? Have you had recounts there or what?
It's been a chaotic scenes, David, here overnight. Partial recounts, and then finally at 7 o'clock this morning, a full recount ordered. That started taking place at 2 o'clock. And if you have a look behind me, you can just see that the actual counting of those votes, there was some 38,700 people voted here in Dudley North. All of their votes had to be recounted. That initial counting has been done, and they're just checking those ballot papers, it seems, at the end. So we do anticipate to have the result here within the next 10 minutes or so, which we'll bring to you. As you say, the Labour candidate Ian Austin, he's the incumbent, the Conservative candidate Graham Brown. It already seems that, given that it seems there's just 400 votes in this, that there has already been a huge swing towards the Conservatives, which echoes what happened in Dudley South.
Was the recount requested, or was the recount determined by the returning officer saying, I'm not happy with the way it's gone? Were there other problems?
the recount was requested by the Conservative candidate Graham Brown. It did seem that there was a lot of issues involved, certain votes for certain parties turning up in ballot boxes of other parties. The majority which Ian Austin seemed to have in the middle of the night dwindled as the hours went by, until finally the Conservative candidate decided that he wasn't going to accept a result unless there was a full recount. So that's what they decided to do after hours and hours of negotiations. Ian Austin was, I understand, not very happy at the decision to have a full recount. We do anticipate to see his reaction when we finally get the result, as I say, hopefully within the next 10 minutes, some 15 hours after they thought that they were going to
Thank you very much.
Thursday, 6th of May,
St Ives now.
2010.
Liberal Democrats hold this with a majority of 10,000.
Votes recorded for each candidate
was due
at the
to
election
count
is as
on the
follows.
second day. So here's the result.
Timothy Howard Andrews, known as Tim Andrews, Green Party, 1,308. Michael Patrick Faulkner, known as Mick Faulkner, UK Independence Party, 2,560. Andrew Henry George, known as Andrew George, Liberal Democrat, 19,619. Philippa Jocelyn Latimer, Labour, 3,751. Simon John Reid, Mervyn Colonel, 387. Jonathan Charles Rogers, Cornish Democrats, 396. Derek Gordon Thomas, known as Derek Thomas, Conservative, 17,900.
So the Liberal Democrats hold on to St Ives. Fascinating how many other smaller parties there are in lots of these constituencies. People stacking up 200 or 300 votes, but going through all the trouble of canvassing and holding an election, putting their names up, paying their £500, losing it if they get under 5% of the vote. Anyway, in St Ives, the Liberal Democrats hold on. There's one other result. Let's just have a look at the swing here. Liberal Democrats to Conservatives, 10.4%. I always think that the very, 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 very small majorities must have people kicking themselves if they didn't go to the polls and cast their vote. From Fermanagh and South Tyrone, this is the smallest majority in this election. The smallest previous one was Mark Oaten in Winchester, way back, who had a majority of 2. Sinn Féin hold Fermanagh and South Tyrone with a majority of 4. Just 4. So you wonder what people who might have voted for Rodney Connor or Fergal McKinney or the Alliance Party or Independents are thinking. If only I'd just gone there, they could have been defeated. But equally it can work the other way. So the smallest majority, 4. And we have 6 now, 6 more constituencies to declare. Let's have a look at the shape of the country on the map. There are only a few more white spaces left.
Yeah,
Emily.
fascinating. You can really recognise them. Dudley North that Claire Marshall was talking about a little while ago. Morecambe here, you can really see, we promised you at the beginning of the night, if you were with us whenever that was, that we would colour in the map for you. This is what it's looking like now. I'm going to show you how we started off and see if you can spot the differences. So that was 2005. The Tories then having started to make these inroads into the north, not in those dense urban conurbations, but around them, in the suburbs almost. They have picked up seats in Wales. Look, from that 3 there, they've done very well there. Now 8, but very little movement in Scotland. I'm going to show you what I did at the beginning of the night, make every single constituency the same size hexagon. Now you can see what's happened. This then is what the country looks like in a balanced, hung parliament. We know now it is too late for the Conservatives to get that parliamentary majority. The kind of shape then, moving into the north, they haven't moved far enough to get that majority. They haven't done enough in Scotland. They haven't taken quite enough of this bit, and they've still left all these Lib Dem gains in the southwest. That is why we are where we are now. David.
Thank you very much, Emily. Well, now, I'm joined here by Lord Butler, Very good to see you. Thank you for coming in. He was Cabinet Secretary from 1988 to 1998, I think, correct?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to speak to you because I will, though, but we've got a result coming in from Amber Valley in Derbyshire. Let's see that. The man with a very, very large hat. I don't know how many votes he'll have got. He's not down as the large. Well, we'll see what party he's. Monster Raving Loony, perhaps? I don't know. Yes, he is. The Raving Loony.
Gentlemen, I propose to make the declaration.
Sam Thing, also known as
Election
Thing,
of a member
or
of
Sam,
Parliament
perhaps.
for the Amber Valley constituency. Declaration of result of poll.
This is a Labour-held seat with a majority of 5,500 at the last election.
The election of a member of Parliament for the Amber Valley constituency, held on the 6th day of May 2010, do hereby give notice that the number of votes recorded for each candidate at the said election is as follows. Clark Michael John, British National Party, 3195. Malabar Judy Claire Judith, the Labour Party candidate, 17210. Mills Nigel John, the Conservative Party candidate, 17746. Ransom.
Well, it's a Labour gain, I mean a Conservative gain, sorry, in Amber Valley. Judy Malabar, defeated there by about 500 votes by the Conservative Nigel Mills.
Candidate, 6636. Thing, Samuel Mark Baker, official Monster Raving Loony Party, 265.
Very respectable, 265
The number
for
of
Thing.
ballot papers rejected was as follows. Voting for more
There's one of
candidates
Thing's supporters on the left of the screen there.
19.
Now here are the figures. Let's just have a look at these. Majority of 536 for the Conservatives. That's a Conservative gain in Amber Valley in Derbyshire. New MP Nigel Mills. And the swing, Labour to Conservative, 6.9%. Healthy swing. And we've got one other result in, which is Morecambe and Loonsdale.
Declaration of the result of poll for the,
another
for
Conservative
the Morecambe and
gain.
Loonsdale constituency. I, the undersigned, being the acting returning officer at the election of a member of Parliament for the Morecambe and Loonsdale constituency.
Very small majority.
Held on the 6th of May 2010, do hereby give notice that the number of votes recorded for each candidate at the election is as follows. Coates, Green Party, Chris, 598. Jones, Liberal Democrats, Leslie, 5,791. Knight, UK Independence Party, Mark Andrew, 1,843. Morris, the Conservative Party candidate, David, 18,035. Smith, the Labour Party candidate, Geraldine, 17,169. There were 82 ballot papers that were rejected.
All right, Geraldine Smith, who's been the MP there since 1997, who was a supporter of Gordon Brown, defended him against the plotters, who she called the Lancashire Mafia, loses Morecambe and Loonsdale to the Conservatives. The swing of 6.9%, Labour to Conservative in Morecambe and Loonsdale. So that leaves us 4 to go only. 4 more results to come in, one of which won't come in because it's Thirsk and Malden in Yorkshire, We're not going to have the election there for another 3 weeks because of the death of a UKIP candidate. And according to the rules, if a member of a political party, as opposed to an independent, dies once the once the election has been announced, the election is postponed until that party can find another candidate. Now, let me come back to Lord Butler, Cabinet Secretary between 1988 and 1998, has experience of the government of John Major when it was in a minority, and has also experience of the conversations between Tony Blair and the Liberal Democrats under Paddy Ashdown. It's all very decorous, Lord Butler, today. Everybody's saying how well people are behaving. Now, I don't want to dig the dirt with you, but dish a bit of it on us. What's actually going on between these political parties?
Well, I think that they are behaving very well, as one would expect and hope. They do talk about putting the national interest first, and that's what you would expect. Of course, there's bound to be an element of party interest as well. It would be unrealistic not to suppose that. But it seems to me that the leaders of the parties are taking a very statesmanlike approach to it, and there will be thorough discussions. I think they're a little more political between Labour and the Lib Dems than between the Conservatives and the Lib Dems, where there's clearly the Conservative proposal centres very much more on policy. And so one would expect those discussions to be a bit more substantial.
And how would you expect, supposing those discussions, which will take a number of days perhaps, how would you expect Nick Clegg to be able to get a guarantee that what had been agreed would be delivered? Would you expect all this to be open and in writing and published, the agreements?
There's been very much more thorough preparation for this situation this time than there ever was in the past. I was in 10 Downing Street in 1974, and after that, any election that I had anything to do with, I made sure that we did actually think seriously about a hung parliament. We certainly did in 1992, and although it wasn't likely in 1997, we could have dealt with that. But the civil service this time have, I think, had role-playing in order to prepare for this situation. And civil servants will be attached to each of the three main parties. They will be there not to advise on the politics, but to inform and facilitate the discussions, and they will arrange them, and they will no doubt take minutes, and so there will be a proper, pretty formal system of discussions which will be recorded.
What was the system then in February 74? We had Lord Armstrong in the seat you're sitting in a moment ago, and reading from his secret memorandum about how the negotiations were conducted. What went wrong there?
Well, I remember it very well.
Right? Well, what were you doing then? What was your job?
Well, I was a junior private secretary, so I was making the tea and ringing people up and getting them round and trying to trace people. So my role was a pretty menial one, but I was there on the inside and felt the emotion of the events. But the difference then was that it took us by surprise, really. Edward Heath, I think, did expect to win that election. And I remember very well that we had an election party at my house, and Robert Armstrong was there. And when the first results came in at about 11 o'clock, he said, "I think I'd better have an early night." And so he went home. And I guess that the present Cabinet Secretary and the civil servants will have had an early night last night to prepare for this situation.
What are the dangers, as you see it, for either side in these negotiations? What can go wrong?
Well, I think what can go wrong is that you make the wrong decision. And I can imagine that there could be an outcome of these discussions where the party that makes an agreement will, in time to come, regret that they ever did. And that may not be visible immediately, but that's what could go wrong.
Robin, we heard David Cameron there saying that he would hope that this could be concluded quite swiftly. Do you think this is one of those negotiations where you can agree a broad outline and then paint in the detail afterwards? Or this is one of those negotiations where nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, which could presumably then take days and days and days, if not weeks?
Well, there's a dilemma here because, on the one hand, they must be very tired. And these are very important negotiations, and no company would put people in to negotiate for them in the situation that the leaders must be in. On the other hand, there is pressure of time, and I don't think they can wait long after early next week. So they've got these two conflicting pressures, and what I would expect is that the discussions will reach heads of agreement. And people will make sure that the essential points are covered. But there will be a lot of detail to be filled in subsequently.
Yeah, fascinating.
Right, well, we'll break away now to have a look at... We've only got 4 more seats to declare. That's 3 more today. Let's have a look at the map of the United Kingdom, the state of the parties as a result of this general election. Jeremy.
David, one more look at this map left by the 2005 general election first, and here you see it, and I'll just get the gains to flash here that we've seen today. And a lot of the seats that first taken by Labour in 1997, gained by him, flipped back, if I can use that word, to the Conservatives on this occasion. So you'll see, as I stabilise it, a lot more blue. There's another way of showing it, though, and if I put this on the wall, you'll see we have here 650 House of Commons seats from 2005. Just take a look at this. So here they all are, and you can see we've grouped them by colour, and we put all the parties together. So Labour here, and the Conservatives here, Lib Dems down here, and the other parties further on. So what we're going to do now is show you just what the change is. If I stand on the join, and I get the display to change, you'll see what's happened in this election. And here we go. So you see immediately that is what this election has done. It's taken all these seats here that are red and it's turned them blue. And that's why the Conservatives are so pleased with this huge incursion into Labour territory here. And also if we go down here and take a look, you can see also the Conservatives stealing some of those orange Lib Dem seats as well. A little bit of Lib Dem orange coming back the other way, but not a good night for the Liberal Democrats. And as I say, it's at this junction of red and blue where the Conservatives have finally got some revenge for what happened to them in 1997 with Tony Blair's first landslide. This is the story here. Massive gains for them, but with the proviso that their actual share, their percentage share of the vote, is not as impressive as the number of new seats taken. So with David Cameron still in the mid-30s on percentage share, he could have done with a bit more in terms of votes, in terms of seats, to make this election picture clearer. So we leave with a somewhat indistinct picture after an absolutely fascinating night of politics. David, back to you.
Jeremy, thank you very much indeed. Let's join Jeremy Paxman up in the gallery.
Well, I have with me 3 politicians, especially chosen for their photogenetic qualities. Right, Jeff Hoon, Mick Campbell and Douglas Carden. Well, I mean, fascinating election, absolutely fascinating. Who'd have thought that, you know, sat down at 10 o'clock last night, it's nearly 4 o'clock the afternoon the next day, we still don't know really what's happened.
Well, that's actually what the opinion polls have been saying, so to that extent the opinion polls have got the broad outline right. What I think has really been fascinating is the differential swing, because we've all looked at these results. Thanks to the BBC, we've had fancy little bits of software that have told us what the results were in each seat, but the truth is, in each seat, you've seen tremendous differences. North, south, different regions, real democracy at work.
And is it totally attributable to you that all the constituencies around you did so badly for Labour?
That's not entirely true. We held Ashfield, I accept,
yes, but
accept narrowly.
Yeah, from about 14,000 down to a few hundred, your majority.
Well, I'm not...
That's just the strength of his personality. What's the abiding memory for you, Mick Campbell?
Nick Clegg's coming of age.
Yeah.
Quite extraordinary. Now, it wasn't reflected eventually in the results, but it certainly drove the campaign for a very long time. The other thing I want to point out is this, that this is a very long election campaign. It started almost as soon as Gordon Brown decided not to have an election in November 2007. And the way the House of Commons has operated, the things that the government brought forward or didn't bring forward, all related to the fact that eventually there had to be an election on the 6th of June. We keep talking about whether
everyone's disappointed. Of course, you've got reason to be disappointed too in the Conservatives.
I've got reason to be cheerful. Biggest number of gains in 8 years. Not quite good enough
kind of
for an outright majority.
Statistic, isn't it? It is. It's about winning. You didn't win.
It would have been nice to have an absolute majority, but my own observation is that perhaps one of the things we all have to accept as politicians, there's an increasing appetite there for the politics that's niche, distinctive, particular, local. The age of sort of generic mass-branded political parties is coming to an end, and we need a looser political party system that allows the niche, the distinctive, the particular. And this explains, as Jeff said, why there's so much local variation in the results. It's a good thing this is happening.
And if that produces more independent members of Parliament, more willing to scrutinise the executive, even if it's of their own party, then that can only strengthen politics.
Absolutely.
Thank you all very much. David.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Well, Rory Hethron-Jones, we were told this was going to be right up your street, this election. It was all going to be Twittering and tweeting and Facebooking and all the rest. Didn't turn like that at all. It was three big debates that dominated the media.
You're so wrong, David.
Well, I know you've got your head stuck in your computer.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, how many thousand tweets have there been about today, for instance?
There's been an enormous number of tweets.
How many million people are watching this programme?
Some of them, which I will come to in a while, about you.
Coming to the end. And no, don't tell me ones about me.
No, I mean, what we've got breaking out here, quite interestingly, is some reaction to what David Cameron's been saying, some criticism of the Tory campaign. Here is a tweeter called Parsifal2. He's actually the chairman of Bell Pottinger, one of the leading lobbyists. And here's what he says. Someone who needs to take the blame for the campaign and resign or be fired. Tory activists are angry and depressed. Later on, he says, time for change in the Tory party. We need some Tories directing the next campaign so we win it. Not just
You're sure you know who he is?
I'm pretty sure I know who he is, yes. He is the chairman of...
Why does he disguise himself as Parsifal 2? Who is Parsifal 1?
He's an opera fan, he says. He's an opera lover.
But Bell Pottinger are a big PR company.
They are, exactly. Founded by Lord
Tim Bell. It's not Tim Bell himself, is it?
It's not Tim Bell himself,
How do you know? This is the trouble with this, it's all anonymous.
Well, here's one that isn't anonymous,
All right.
and we know who it is. It's Fraser Nelson, the editor of The Spectator, saying The Spectator cannot support the inquiry into electoral reform. Not just a lot of toing and froing, though, on Twitter, on the blogs too. This is a Labour blog, Left Foot Forward, Will Straw, son of Jack Straw's blog. A discussion on will the Lib Dems accept Cameron's offer. He says there's a lot of toing and froing amongst the Lib Dems who are not at all happy about it. One blogger we haven't heard much about, probably the most famous blogger, Guido Fawkes, and he's got an interesting take here, which I've not really seen elsewhere.
Can you pause a second? We've got a declaration coming.
I can.
Facts over opinion. Dudley North, Ian Austin's the MP since 2005 with a majority of just over 4,000. And here's the results of Dudley North in the West Midlands.
Held on the 6th of May 2010, do hereby...
It's the 106th Conservative target, this, just below the level they wanted if they want to get an overall majority.
Follows. Ian Austin, the Labour Party candidate, 14,923. Mike Beckett, Liberal Democrats for a Fairer Britain, 4,066. Graham Harold Brown, the Conservative Party candidate, 14,274. Malcolm Davis, UK Independence Party, UKIP, 3,267. Kenneth John Griffiths, British National Party, 1,899. Kevin Inman, National Front, 173. There were 93 rejected papers.
So Dudley North is held by Labour. Big drop, incidentally, in the BNP vote in Dudley North, interestingly.
Is duly elected as member of
About 3,000, if I got the figure right. Labour's Ian Austin holds it. His majority is 649. It was 4,000 before, but it's a Labour hold in Dudley North, a swing from Labour to the Conservatives of 4.7%. I feel I've cut you off in your prime, Rory, but we've got to go to the news now, and if we have a chance, tweet away and pick up some more very interesting points. I didn't mean to be rude about it. I know it's the way of the future. Let's go to the news. Sian.
Thank you very much, David. Yes, with the time at just after 3:30, let's bring you up to date with where we are at this extraordinary day. Britain has a hung parliament with no one party in overall control. The Conservatives are the largest party, and David Cameron has already made what he described as a big, open and comprehensive offer to the Liberal Democrats to begin talks to work together to form a government. Here's the latest with Colette Macbeth. They're warning her report does contain some flash photography.
At 2:30 p.m. on the day after the UK voted, David Cameron did not want to be here, forced to talk about deals instead of announcing the formation of a government.
I want to make a big, open and comprehensive offer to the Liberal Democrats. I want us to work together in tackling our country's big and urgent problems, the debt crisis, our deep social problems, and our broken political system.
Nick Clegg, are you going to do a deal with the Tories?
Earlier, Nick Clegg seemed to open the door to that kind of deal. Even though last night's poor results were a bitter blow for him, he knows he could still be the kingmaker.
It seems this morning that it's the Conservative Party that has more votes and more seats, though not an absolute majority. And that is why I think it is now for the Conservative Party to prove that it is capable of seeking to govern in the national interest.
But when Gordon Brown walked out of Downing Street this afternoon, it wasn't for good, but to send a message. We are still in government for now, and we may yet be able to do a deal with the Liberal Democrats.
Mr Cameron and Mr Clegg should clearly be entitled to take as much time as they feel necessary. For my part, I should make clear that I would be willing to see any of the party leaders. Clearly, should the discussions between Mr Cameron and Mr Clegg come to nothing, then I would of course be prepared to discuss with Mr Clegg the areas where there may be some measure of agreement between our two parties.
So as the talk of deals and pacts continue, Gordon Brown is trying to present himself in prime ministerial mode. Yet as he entered number 10, the question still unanswered is how much longer will he be there? Colette Macbeth, BBC News, Westminster.
So we have a hung parliament. We only have 3 seats to declare, so let's bring you a breakdown on the current state of the parties. We'll bring it up on the screen here. Conservatives, 304 seats, Labour, 258, the Liberal Democrats, 57, and the others, 28. And in terms of the share of the vote, the Tories have 36%, Labour 29%, the Liberal Democrats 23%, and the others 12%. Now we're just hearing that talks are going to start this evening between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. When asked, will Mr Cameron and Mr Clegg talk, a Conservative source has told the BBC yes, the discussions are likely, we hear, to be by phone. With that, it's back to you, David.
Very much, Sean. Well, we're just hearing, and rather tantalising as we're about to go off air, that it seems that Lancaster and Fleetwood is a Tory gain, and that just leaves 2 more seats to go. But we haven't got the figures yet, so I'm not taking it with a pinch of salt. I'm sure it's true. But Lancaster and Fleetwood is a Tory gain, and the other one, Devon West and Torridge, is a Conservative-held seat, so perhaps likely to stay held by the Conservatives. Well, we're coming up towards the end of this. Let's just talk about this whole day and the day before, which has been quite extraordinary. The confusion when that first exit poll came out. And to tell the absolute truth, none of the experts, and I've talked to the real experts who designed that exit poll, even they didn't quite believe it. And yet that exit poll has turned out pretty well to be true in the event, because the most astonishing election with no even pattern. Goodness knows what David Butler, who was here, would write about it, I don't know. But don't you agree it's been the most astonishing
I'm going to use a David Butler quote, which is that the expert is right no more often than the ordinary person. He's just wrong for more sophisticated reasons, which was one of David Butler's great quotes. This is absolutely right, and I don't know how they got it right when there's been such extraordinary variation across so many different constituencies, where some we've looked at enormous turnout and massive swings, and others we've looked where nothing has changed, and it's gone in all directions, and yet the exit poll has seemed to get it right. The other thing is that it seems that £40 million later, we've finished up where we started off in this campaign, with the Liberal Democrats broadly at the same point.
Lord Butler, what do you make of it, this campaign, and the result?
Well, of course, as you say, the exit polls were quite extraordinarily right, though with many variations in between, so they were right in many ways for the wrong reasons. What strikes me about it is that I think I'm right in saying that in general, incumbents won and new candidates didn't win. And what that suggests to me is that the expenses scandal played very much smaller role in the results than one might have expected.
Well, what happens now, the term hung parliament is derived from hung jury. When the jury can't agree, the judge dismisses the jury and orders a retrial. And this is what I think will happen with a hung parliament. The electorate hasn't made up its mind, and I think the eventual Prime Minister will dismiss this Parliament, which I think won't last anything like 4 or 5 years, and ask the voters if they can make up their mind and perhaps decide on whether they want a new electoral system. I think that is the real lesson of this election.
We're into a process that they say they're going to speak on the telephone today. That's David Cameron and Nick Clegg. Remembering David Cameron called this thing muddle and fudge. I don't quite know how he gets himself out of muddle and fudge.
Just a quick line to add that John Major has said that offering cabinet seats to senior Liberal Democrats was a price worth paying for the formation of a stable government able to manage the current economic crisis. So I don't know whether John Major is speaking to David Cameron. They do talk quite a lot, as I understand it. John Major being an outrider there for cabinet seats for Liberal Democrat MPs.
Do you think they're likely to offer them?
I think there's an awful long way to go, and I think there's still so many hurdles to cross before we get there.
We've got another Conservative gain. Let's just see the detail of this. I'm told this is the 100th Conservative gain, but I don't actually think it is quite the 100th Conservative gain, because they've only had 97. They've only had a net 97. Well, anyway, Lancaster and Fleetwood, Conservative gain from Labour, and there are the figures. Majority of 333. Previous majority for Labour was 3,428. So that is the 100th gain. Apparently it's a net 97 gains. They've made 100 gains and they've lost 3. Rory, not to leave you lonely and sad there, a few more final tweets.
I think one of the things that we may belittle these social networks and so on. What they have done is energise a whole group of young people who've never voted before, have got really involved in this. I've just seen a Facebook group formed called Cool It, We're Not Going to Form a New Government Just to Suit 24-Hour News. People getting involved via things like Facebook, via things like Twitter. I suppose the question is, will they have enjoyed this process and will they want to come back next time?
Well, all elections in a way are fun. In some ways this hasn't been perhaps quite as much fun as others because so much is at stake. Because we have such a crisis internationally, such a crisis over our economy. Cuts we know all 3 parties have been talking about right through the campaign, not quite being pinned down to what they are. Increases in taxes to come, likely cutbacks in jobs, likely cutbacks in services. That's the background to this. It's a rather sombre background to this election. And yet, in narrow political terms, it's been fascinating not to see the country deliver a hung parliament. It doesn't do that, but to vote in a way that has produced a political scenario of immense complexity. And when we'll see whether these elected politicians really are able to work together and are up to the job.
We're being disenfranchised, and that's not on. I think everyone's very angry.
Hear, hear.
Yeah.
Disappointing night for you, Mr. Clegg.
The outcome of this country's vote is not yet known.
I believe it is already clear that the Labour government has lost its mandate to govern our country.
And I hereby declare that Caroline Lucas is duly elected Member of Parliament for the Brighton Pavilion constituency.
It seems this morning that it's the Conservative Party that has more votes and more seats, though not an absolute majority. And that is why I think it is now for the Conservative Party to prove that it is capable of seeking to govern in the national interest.
Are you ruling out a deal with Labour?
For my part, I should make clear that I would be willing to see any of the party leaders. A fairer voting system is central, and I believe that you, the British people, should be able to decide in a referendum what the system should be.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to make a big, open and comprehensive offer to the Liberal Democrats. I want us to work together in tackling our country's big and urgent problems, the debt crisis, our deep social problems, and our broken political system.
Back to our Friday afternoon lineup and Flog It by the Seaside next on BBC One.
Modern art, it sells for a fortune, but what's it ever done for us?
So we'll end our BBC simulcast of the British election results at this point. A quick reminder that there is more coverage online at cspan.org. With just 3 seats remaining to declare, the results so far have the Conservative Party in the lead with 305 seats, the Labour Party with 258, and Liberal Democrats third with 57 seats. 326 seats are needed to win, so the outcome is uncertain. We hope to have statements from the party leaders in just a moment.
This weekend on C-SPAN